Yeah, the work we were doing up there is for a South African company that's looking at investing in Zambia in the roofing, broader roofing industry, if you like. So we went up to go and have a look, see what was going on, doing a fairly comprehensive study in terms of the size of the market, the competition, where to locate a plant and warehousing, which is why I ended up driving through from Lusaka up to Ndola, which was quite interesting. Just in terms of the country itself, I was saying to a couple of people earlier, it's quite schizophrenic at the moment, because you've got a country where there's a huge amount of development happening, but at the same time there's a lot of concern in the local business community about how it's happening and what's driving it. So there's a fair amount of concern about the direction that the presidency in Zambia is going. President Lungu has taken quite a populist stance on a number of issues. He's also proven fairly intolerant of opposition, arresting the opposition leader whose motorcade didn't move out of the way for his motorcade, and it's so you've got that kind of thing. Also now claiming that there are forces that are trying to recolonize Zambia, simply because a few judges have questioned whether he's eligible to stand for election again in 2021. So he is a bit of a loose cannon at the moment, but there is still a lot of investment in Zambia and a lot of interest in the country. Lusaka is growing pretty quickly. Yeah, it's growing quite quickly. A lot of private sector development in things like housing, in retail parks, in commercial developments and so on. And those are mainly at the upper end of the market. Zambia, like most countries in the region, has quite a large housing deficit, about 1.3 million units. Given that there's only 14 million people in the country, that's quite a large percentage of the population that doesn't have access to formal housing, if you like. So there are a lot of programs and interventions that government is trying to get off the ground to provide housing for people, but there isn't a lot of cash available for that. So if you look at the government side of things, there are a number of the domestic insurance and state insurance corporations. The African Development Bank has just announced that they're going to lend the Zambia National Building Society $25 million to try and unlock some of that potential in low to mid-income housing in Zambia. Talking to contractors up there, to property developers, there is a sense that after a couple of pretty grotty years in the property market, things are starting to turn around and recover at all ends of the market, but particularly into the mid and upper income end of the market. Lusaka and Ndola and Kitwe, most of the big towns in Zambia, are also going through a sort of a phase of renewal where you've had for many years the degradation of the CBDs, the sort of overcrowding of them. And so what they're doing in Zambia is they're actually encouraging these developers to develop satellite towns outside of Lusaka. So if you look at something like the Roma integrated development, it's a special economic zone that they've had declared there. It's an integrated residential, commercial and retail development where they will ultimately build around 10,000 housing units. They're busy with phase 1 at the moment. A lot of this development at that level is being driven by South African finance, South African architects, and South African property developers. So we do already have that linkage. In fact, the guys who are the key architects for that is also the head of the Zambian Institute of Architects, and he is the Zambian partner for Louis Carroll Architects here in South Africa. So we do have those strong linkages. Outside of that, everywhere you go, and I don't know who's going to actually end up in those buildings, although perhaps as people move out of the CBD, they'll repopulate themselves, because there's a lot of these things like the Gallery Office Park. So huge numbers of office parks popping up all over the place. Lots of, like the Arcades Mall being redeveloped. That's actually being a Chinese contractor is redeveloping that. Huge presence of Chinese companies right across the board. They're not just doing the hydropower and roads and so on. They're doing down to things like redeveloping malls across Zambia. So you do have a lot of competition at that level, right through from the material suppliers through to the contractors. And then that Roma Park. So it's one of the several of the new multifaceted ones. Things like Louisville, Lusaka, slightly more regional context. The guys who are developing that are actually property developers from Botswana, and they've developed 2 or 3 things in Gabs, and they were invited up to Lusaka because people really liked what they were doing. So you've got these upmarket developments. If you go down Leopard Hill Road, you'll start to see quite a few of them once you get past the presidential complex and the golf course and a couple of the hotels and areas like that, into these big developments out there. So you are starting to see that kind of thing being unlocking. There's a lot of unhappiness in Zambia, particularly amongst the business community, about what is happening with Chinese contractors and Chinese suppliers in the country. You'll see on the next slide, or the one after this, a major Chinese retail development where they are going in as developers of property and investors. So they get the land for free and they put up these sort of units that looks like about 12 or 15 macros at a time. If you buy something there, you're not going to see a VAT number or a company registration number on the till slip. They're not paying tax. And even when some of the domestic companies have insisted that the revenue services go and investigate it, things just get stonewalled. One company actually said, we took the revenue service there and we were told, go and speak to Lungu. He takes our taxes. So there is this unhappiness with what's going on in the country. And I do think that there will at some stage be a bit of a kickback against that. The Great North Road. Those of you who listen to rock music, you'll know that Meatloaf had a song called 2 out of 3 Ain't Bad. Great North Road fits into that. It goes north. It's a road. It's not so great. It's actually in general, if you look at the top picture, that's what most of it looks like. So it's not actually in bad condition. It's just where you get in and out of towns, where they have roadblocks and everybody's got to stop and the trucks will sit for a few hours, that you then get this kind of corrugation and the breakup of the roads on that Great North Road. This picture, I was driving, so I was having to try and multitask, which isn't one of my strong points, of driving and avoid the cops and taking pictures and everything at the same time. So they're actually much worse sections than that of the road, and that road is deteriorating pretty quickly. You can see there's trucks going either way. Zambia Railways, for those of you who are interested in railways, when I was in Ndola, I was chatting to Bolloré Logistics. They gave me some fantastic information. Zambia Railways wants to take about 30% of Zambia's total cargo off-road and put it onto rail. So they're looking at several million tons of cargo a year. The problem is they don't have the rolling stock for it at the moment. They've got a leasing agreement with Transnet, but they still don't have enough rolling stock to get about 50% of copper and cobalt, about 50% of cement, 50% of steel, and 50% of diesel off-road and onto rail. At the moment, 95% of cargo in Zambia is on road, which is why the roads look like they do. So you're starting to see, and that's a permanent feature. I think, Roelof, when you were in the Copper Belt, the roads look that bad and worse as well, because that's just what the nature of the beast is, as you've got that road transit going on and so on. So as you get into each of the towns, you will see there is a big Chinese mall selling usually things like corrugated iron sheeting and cheap building materials, cheap aluminium bits and bobs and whatever. But in the bigger towns, you can literally walk in there and buy everything that you need for anything in a house, including automotive spare parts. And it really is quite something to see. There is a new mall in Kabwe, which is pretty much a South African mall. So you've got Cashbuild and ShopRite and Hungry Lion and the usual mall developments there. And Kabwe is actually re-emerging from, it used to be a mining town. The mines have closed, and they're trying to reinvent it as almost like a sort of an agricultural hub. So a Chinese company has built a fertilizer plant there. Turkish companies built a big a concrete products facility in Kabwe, and there's a couple of other developments. So in Zambian terms, they're trying to make it into a little hub, but not kind of a major one. Kapiri and Poshi, you know, it always sounds quite exotic because it's where the Zambian railways that comes from the Congo down to Durban intersects with the Tazara line that goes off to Dar es Salaam, and you think, wow, this must be, there's really not a hell of a lot there. Yara, the Scandinavian fertilizer company, has quite a big warehouse there. Other than that, there's just a couple of billboards of the president and not much else. So not really much of a thing at all. And then you get to Ndola. And this is where this kind of schizophrenia in Zambia comes in, because you'll get the guys will bend your ear for hours about how lousy everything is. And the one guy that I met, he's a big retailer up there, and he said, you know, without the cement plants, this would be a dying town. Oh, the Chinese are killing everything, blah, 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 blah. But listen, if your client wants a local partner, tell him I'm here. I'm very happy to deal with him. So you kind of get the schizophrenia where everybody is moaning about stuff, but they still understand that there is quite a nice market for them in the area. So this Dola Hill Wholesale City and Shopping Mall, each one of those is kind of a macro size development. They're massive. And the undertaking is that they're going to build an integrated development with housing and all the rest of it. About 500 meters down the road, I saw one tiny little house under construction. I don't even know if it was related to the small development. I think the only Zambian employed in it is the guy sitting at the top of the billboard. These are the hardware stores and the wholesalers and whatever. Inside it, Chinjen Hardware, you know, you can see that what it's doing is it's draining the center of Ndola. So all of those businesses that are there are now being superseded by these big things. Those of you who know Ndola will know where this is. It's right next to the Levi Mwanawasa football stadium, that big new football stadium on the Kitwe Road. So there's a little bit of construction. There's that big sign at Kapiri and Poshi where the president is advertising the Great North Road and all the rest of it. But it really is, I think, if you're looking at it, it still is a good market in terms of its access into places like the Congo, into parts of Botswana. Once the Kazangula Bridge is completed, we've already been chatting when we took the group visit up there, companies in Botswana who are very keen to see that done because it means they have access into southern Zambia. And a number of Zambian companies have said they can't wait for the Kazangula Bridge to be developed because that gives them great access into Botswana. So it still is a nice market, but I think you need to really, really look at it very carefully in terms of the level of competition, what kind of competition it is, and who it is that you want to supply in Zambia when you go there. So thanks. I just wanted to rule off now you've got to try and sell it positively.
My story will certainly be, it's in a different sector, all of that, so it will definitely be more positive. Although I think what you're saying, Duncan, is not necessarily negative. What Africa House does is we try and tell it like it is. We don't try and sugarcoat what you find in Africa. You need to know exactly what is happening. What I'm going to do in terms of my feedback today is when looking at the quality of the information that we received, I'm going to spend a bit of time on a mine that we got good quality information from in the New Copper Belt, the Barrick mine in Lumwana, and I will cover some of the other issues, and then I'm going to spend a bit of time on the Mopani mine, because we also got some nice information there, and because that will give you an indication of what the situation is in Zambia in terms of mining. But before we get there, Duncan kindly did some background macroeconomic data, but let me just quickly some of it is the same. In terms of the background, the new president and the raucous domestic politics is something to consider. There's some stuff happening there which we have to keep an eye on open. In terms of mining, the last 2-3 years were pretty tough for them. Low commodity prices, drought, and electricity supply disruptions because of the drought. Relations between some of the mines and government has been difficult. One mine, Glencore, as recently as August, was saying to government, despite the fact that you agreed electricity prices with the other guys, we are going to let some of the miners go, and we're not willing. And on the 22nd of August, Lusaka Times reported that they reduced the electricity supply to the Glencore mine. And Glencore is saying, fine, yeah, we'll make do and see. So it's a bit of a standoff. Some of the other mines, they bashed some heads, but based on the first point and what Duncan has also said, my feeling is it will even out eventually. Local content, human capital development are big issues. There are higher copper prices in 2017. It's one of the reasons why we went. Regional challenges, we were talking on the email today about it. The region is really changing face pretty quickly. We've got President Dos Santos, who's left after 40 years. We've got our friend, former president, can I even say that, Robert Mugabe, who's left. Things will change in the DRC. The election there has been delayed. It looks like it will happen sometime next year. So we're looking at a region that is changing quite rapidly. South Africa is market share, I think, Duncan, help me if I'm misquoting your stats, from 2010 to 2015, our market share in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, in terms of exports, reduced from around 10% to 8.6%. So our market share is reducing in Africa. Individually, some of you might be doing better, but there are lots of different reasons for it. So if you look at this graph, we've just included it for you to say that they basically, in terms of GDP growth, it's not spectacular, but it's stable, and GDP in billions of dollars has a nice upward curve, and investments a slow uptick. So from that point of view, things are pretty stable in Zambia. We're not going to go into detail, but it's just to see the key exporters to Zambia. The usual suspects are our competitors. I want to point out, if you look at that number there to that one there, in terms of Namibia, it's been a nice increase for it, and you'll see we've been pretty stable. You also see a bit of a reduction from some of the traditional guys in it as well. That's just to for you to have some insight into what's happening in terms of who exports there. This is also not too surprising. The one that catches the eye is iron and steel products, which is pretty stagnant, but over time, most of these things, there's been decent increases over this period, and that's the percentage over there. From our project database, the value of the known or listed prices for projects is around $25 billion US dollars. So, and interesting here that there's quite a bit of hydro. Energy is a massive issue, not just in the Zambia copper belt, but also in the DRC. If you can supply a lot of well-priced energy into both those copper belts, you'll see a lot of additional investment. Energy is the big problem, and then the rest of it is what we have in our database is quite a nice mix. It's also good to see that we have some rail things, because judged the road condition, what we did for our visit was that we visited Lusaka, we flew to Solwezi, visited Kinshanchi and Lumwana mine over there. We drove down right to Ndola, so we've seen all the roads there. So the first mine that we visited is First Quantum Mines' Kinshanchi mine, and as you will see on this, I'm not going to read through everything there. It is a massive mine. I think the most important thing that you have to consider here is that figure over there. Just to keep that mine running, they're spending $1.2 billion per annum. So it's a massive mine, and as you will see later with some of the other issues, the thing with copper mines is most of the expenses are on 4 big ticket items, of which energy is the big one. So that also always need to be kept in mind when you do. The other very important thing was our host there was, when we tried to find out what the future of projects, what future projects are coming, it was quite negative. They're busy with a big fight about financial issues in Zambia, and this guy was. We had some Zambian guests with us, and he was just straight up quite negative about the regulatory environment, more or less stemming from what Duncan was saying a little bit earlier. In an environment where commodity prices was low in 2014, 15, 16, government struggling for revenue and that sort of thing, they changed the royalties situation quite a few times. So there was just government trying to extract maximum out of the mines, and these guys are pretty fed up with him at the moment, at least these guys, and they were very, very open about it. The other mine that we visited was the Barrick mine, and we were extremely well received by them. They have a new supply chain manager there who is from South Africa. He recently worked for quite a few years in Ghana, quite an experienced guy, and it was abundantly clear that he's in town, or he's on this mine to look at bringing down costs. And he was very keen, and he engaged at a very high level with many of the delegates in it. So that is something to take note of. But again, just some basic data on the mine. The most important one being that it's not quite as big as the First Quantum mine, but it's a substantial mine nonetheless. And again, yeah, if you look at their spending and if you put it together with the First Quantum mine, you're looking at close to $2 billion just between those two mines. If you put the 4 mines together that we went to visit, they produce about 80% of all the copper in Zambia. So these 2 mines are totally dominant in that region, or in the northwestern province, and there's an indication of how they spent their money in country and out of country, and there's some interesting stats that they shared with us. First Quantum, Barrick. During my pilot visit, I managed to see the CEO of Glencore, the Glencore mine, and he more or less told me, look, I don't think I want to talk to your delegation because you're South African. I need Zambian companies. They have a massive problem getting quality local suppliers, companies that can perform up to their spec. And if you guys don't take this issue seriously, it's going to bite you at some point. So there you can see that the aim is to encourage and facilitate local business opportunities and growth among the small contracting companies. So you'll see more and more of that. I'm not going to go through all of that. They were very open in sharing with us the information, and in the presentations that are available to our subscribers, I don't know why this thing ended up being so big. Apologies for that. But in the they have indicated to us the procurement spend and the names of the companies that they spent the money on. So, and clearly the reason for sharing that is for the delegation to see, well, these are your competitors, we are open for business. If you think you can do better than them, talk to us. They also indicated by supplier their spend year to date. And as you can see there, there are the names of the companies, and that is by supplier. So this information can be pretty useful. Then we went to the Konkola copper mine, owned by an Indian company which is listed in New York and in London. And they told us that they are the world's largest zinc producer after Glencore, and they employ about 15,000 staff worldwide. So it's a truly international company that acquired a very important mine in the copper belt. And recently they sunk a new shaft and constructed a new smelter and concentrator. They're planning to increase production over the next 3 or 4 years. The mine and the town is quite old, and there's a lot of refurbishment that will take place. That's what they told us. They want to improve the workspace and that sort of thing for the employees. They told us that they're upgrading the surface operations, increasing the technology around cobalt extraction. And that mine, a major challenge is for every ton of copper that they mine, they pump 50 tons of water out into the it's the Kafue River right there. So you can imagine the energy and the infrastructure that takes. So if any of you guys have any clever ideas on how to save their money on this, they'll be all ears. They are planning to look at investors to help them establish a 300 megawatt captive power plant, but they are not willing to put their own money into it. No IPPs have been identified, and there are no power purchase agreements. The relations between the mines and the electricity supply community, if you want to call it that, is quite difficult at the moment. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on sharing some ideas on the Mopani copper mine, which is the Glencore-owned mine, and they are the guys who are currently in quite a standoff with the Zambian government. So they've got quite extensive infrastructure there, and it's a mine that started operations in the 1930s. So one of the main things of this mine is that agreed, and we'll unpack that a little bit. During the 2012, the shareholders approved a 1.2 billion investment, and if you look at the next slide, I've just enlarged that a little bit. That's how the money was spent, and you'll see that they are still in the middle of spending some of that money. There are the amounts as well. So the reason for this was basically, if you look at this graph, they've cumulatively, and most of the money was spent here in 2014, It's to ensure that they had to move the infrastructure to new ore bodies. And if they didn't do that, the mine would have failed. So by this 1.2 billion capex investment, they've extended the life of the mine by 25 years. So that mine is going to be around for quite some time. So this is, they've got some very deep shafts there, 1,500 meters. Almost said kilometers, that's a bit deep. 1,500 meters, so our mining supply industry are quite active in that, especially with that. But if you look at this, without the investment in the new shafts, this is what would have happened with the total production. But with the new investment, they're looking at a nice upward curve and a stabilization from 2020 onwards in terms of total production. This is also just an indication. They also spend around $600 million US, and again the local issue. So they spend most of the money on Zambian vendors. I've got a couple of pictures that they shared with us about the new shaft that they built, the Mufu Lira Deeps project, the Mindola Deep Shaft project, the metallurgical projects that you saw earlier on the thing, the new concentrators. So as you can see from these images, it was quite a substantial investment. And some pictures of the refinery. So it's important to note what we did was we did spend a day in Lusaka as well. As luck would have it, I'm a very lucky guy when it comes to these things. President Zuma, 3 or 4 days before we left for Zambia, we found out that he was on a state visit to Zambia as well. So our local High Commission couldn't see us. The High Commissioner said, no, you won't be seeing me. I'm looking after the President, which is fine. But what we did do is we went to see the Ministry of Mines. We saw the electricity supply company. We saw the Copperbelt Energy Corporation and the Zambia Development Agency in Lusaka. I have some notes on that for those of you that are interested. What we succeeded in doing on this visit as well is we managed to see the mayors of Solwezi, Kolombila, which is close to the Lumwana mine, and Kitwe, and we also saw the Secretary of the Northwest Province. In the new Copperbelt, the opportunity there, in my view, is for those of you who are able to engage with both in PPPs or part of teams who are in PPPs, both the mines and the local authorities would be just too happy with someone who can come up with PPP arrangements to look at supplying social infrastructure like housing, water treatment plants, I think even sanitation. There are all sorts of things. All the mines there, Barrick specifically, they are already investing in local business, local infrastructure. So I think a lot of our companies are missing a trick there. I think the new Copperbelt is an area that you guys should visit on a regular basis, and don't leave the public sector officials out of it. Go and see them. The town of Solwezi, there's a lot of construction happening there in terms of the rehabilitation of the roads and that sort of thing. We also made sure that we saw a lot of chambers of commerce, and we gathered the delegation a lot of business cards. So we saw chambers based in Lusaka, Solwezi, Chingola, and Kitwe. The Ndola one was a little bit quiet, not too many people pitched, but nonetheless we had a brief engagement with them. In the interest of time, I've got quite a few pictures of the road between Solwezi and Chingola, but less than half of it is paved now. And the paved bits are new, so they are in a good condition. But more than half of it are detour roads right next to the area that they are preparing for the paved road. And that road is just terrible. There is no two, we traveled in a 30-seater bus and we couldn't get our speed up beyond 30 or 40, so it was quite a onerous trip for most of us. There were a few lucky guys. If you rent a 4x4, highly recommend it. Don't use anything else. You can get up to 60, 70, 80 kilometers an hour on most of it. And once you get to Chingola and you travel through to Ndola, lots of construction on the road, but exactly the same pictures that Duncan shared with you, I can share with you as well. But they are working on the roads, and around the edges of many of the towns, a lot of construction, so you can get stuck in traffic. So you have to plan the thing. So a couple of closing comments. Africa House just started a new focus group that focus on looking at local presence, human capital development and skills transfer. And the theme through this was consistent, not just from government, but from the mines themselves. So companies have to ensure that they have their human capital development skills transfer plans in order. Our cultural and geographic proximity to the Copper Belt must be made to count. I don't think we are doing it. The Northwestern Chamber of Commerce received us extremely well, and they are definitely an avenue or a way to get into the mines. But at that level, there's not enough engagement. And as I said, we're close to them, culturally we're close to them, and we don't use that enough. Two of the mines said they will in future carry less stock of consumables, spare parts on site, and they will force guys to have their own warehouses next to the mine, and they must carry the cost of the stock. And they will, if they need stock, they will come and buy it from you. Local content and value addition should be looked at. So I think that as South Africa, given the proximity of that sort of thing, we should look at opportunities to not only hunt in packs, as Paul always said, but to collaborate in establishing local infrastructure. That's my story. Thank you very much.